Good evening, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us on this Wednesday night for Buckhead Church's bonus content. You may know we started a message series on Sunday morning here at Buckhead Church a couple weeks ago called Welcome the Wilderness. We've been talking about navigating some of the most difficult times in life. And on these Wednesday nights, we're talking a little bit more specifically about wildernesses that we encounter every day. Last week, April Farmer talked about walking through the wilderness as a single parent. And tonight, we're going to be talking about a very timely topic, navigating the political wilderness. So I think we're going to have an incredible conversation. If you are new and you are joining us on this event for the very first time, thanks so much for being here. Please let us know that you're new. You can do that by heading over to, when this is done, to buckheadchurch.org/new. Please let us know. We'll send you a free gift if you fill that out. If you're not new and you're returning, welcome back. Either way, we would love for you to let us know you're here by dropping your name in the comments, asking some questions along the way. If there's something that we're going to talk about tonight that piques your interest, we'll try to get to some questions at the end. If not, put your question in anyway, and we'll try to answer it offline. Now, to help us navigate this political conversation, I have asked Sarah Anderson to come and join us. And Sarah is my wife, and Sarah has incredible insight into this topic. And Sarah, I want you to fill everybody in on kind of why you're here. But first, obviously, this is a difficult topic to navigate. There's a lot of tension around politics. It feels like it's a dumpster fire right now. So we're going to try to not step on any landmines, and we're just asking that you give us some grace. So there's so much I want to talk to you about tonight, like the isolation we feel from people, why we're afraid to speak up on social media. I want to talk about cancel culture. I want to talk about family divisions and all those things. But before we talk about that, why don't you just tell everybody that's watching why this matters to you? Like, what's your background and why are you speaking about this?
Yeah. I come from a very political family. I grew up just outside Washington, D.C. in Northern Virginia, and my parents both loved politics growing up, both moved to D.C. after graduating from college. They met working at the Republican National Committee, so they fell in love doing what they love. After they got married, my mom continued to work for a congresswoman until my brother was born. My dad worked in the Reagan administration as Undersecretary of Education and then Chief Domestic Policy Advisor to the President. And then my senior year of high school, politics got even more personal in the spring of 1999 when my dad ran for president himself. So he threw his hat into the Republican nomination process, kind of what we saw Democrats doing this time around and Republicans and Democrats doing 4 years ago.
Yeah.
So, I'm sorry.
Bush ultimately went on to win that.
Yes, my maiden name is not Bush,
Okay.
so he did not win.
Got it.
Yeah. So that was just a kind of a little bit of a stretch where politics was a little bit more personal. We kind of experienced it in a different way than we had ever before. And to this day, they've remained very involved. Between my sister and my brother in their professional careers, they've worked for congressmen, senators, governors, and a vice president.
So your dad ran for president your senior year of high school.
Yes.
And so the political temperature escalated probably pretty quickly at that point. Did you enjoy that?
I'm not sure I would say the word enjoy. I think what happened, I think we probably discovered what a lot of people discover once they are in kind of like the political spotlight a little bit, which is you have very little control over the narrative that's being told about your family or about the people that you love. And I think we realized for the first time that what we're seeing portrayed about people on a screen is often a two-dimensional image, and that there is no way that we could ever know the ins and outs of an individual politician, celebrity, or anybody just by what's being told to us from media or anybody. And that's not the media's fault necessarily, it's just the way things are when you aren't able to be up close and personal. And so to me, that kind of introduced the darker side of politics, that there is a narrative that can be spun about you that you don't really have any control over, and that it's personal. It feels personal to the people who are involved in it. It's not necessarily personal to the people who are observing.
Yeah, so I mean, y'all lived out basically what we see every day of people just lobbying attacks at public figures all the time. I mean, from phone calls, emails, pundits, Saturday Night Live, you name it, your family was kind of in the spotlight for a while. And you did not stay in politics.
No.
You left almost
immediately.
Immediately. Why did you leave? because of that reason?
Yeah, it was. It felt very divisive and personal in that way, and I did not want to stick around for that reason. And I thought, I'll go into church world because that's not divisive at all. So,
There's no
church politics.
No,
That's not a problem.
everything's great. Baptists are awesome. No
right.
one argues. Everybody's perfect.
Yeah, so between where I went to make a living and how my family's made a living, we've basically chosen the two topics that are most emotionally charged, if anything, out there. And we're just kind of trying to navigate our way through having these harder conversations. And as a lot of families have found, as we've gotten older and had different life experiences, we haven't always landed on the same page when it comes to our positions in different faith issues, our politics. And because we're so involved in it, my family's just had to figure out a way not to get around these topics, but to work through them in a respectful and honorable way to one another.
Like I said, I've got some very specific questions I want to ask you, but first, why does this matter to you? Because for the last couple of years, you have made very intentional steps to help people navigate, especially relationally, the really difficult waters politically and religious. So why does this matter to you?
I would say there's probably a couple of reasons. The first is historically we see in cultures and countries where there's a very divisive kind of culture happening. It doesn't go well. We went on a trip to Northern Ireland several years ago, and we got to learn a little bit of the history of Belfast there, and we learned how in the late 1960s there was a lot of political unrest and cultural unrest, and Northern Ireland was trying to figure out whether they should stay part of the United Kingdom or become part of the Republic of Ireland, and there's just a lot of violence and protests, a lot happening. And they created these, what they called peace walls, to kind of divide up the city and to keep these different factions of people from engaging with one another. And
literally dividing
them. And the idea was to kind of tamper the violence and to keep things from getting out of hand. But the first peace wall was built in 1969, and this period did not end until the 1990s, late 1990s. So it didn't solve any problem. I think what it did was actually point out to us that the more divisive a culture we live in, the more likely we are to dehumanize the other. And that's to say, not that our differences lead us to dehumanize, but the way that we allow those differences to keep us from one another, dehumanize us. So I think that's a problem. When we look at how we've seen cultures use this divisiveness to separate from each other,
And when we were there, we couldn't imagine that, the Northern Irish people they were the nicest people in the world. You can't imagine this was a violent culture.
Right.
And so seeing that and looking at where we live, we're like, could this happen? It could happen.
Because you see, the more distance you get from people, the more you isolate yourselves, which is what we're seeing happen right now. We're kind of surrounding ourselves with only like-minded people. We're living in these sort of echo chambers. And the more we can separate ourselves out, the more we other one another, right? And we start to see each other as just a political position and not necessarily human behind the position. So that's the first reason it's really personal to me, because I get nervous about where this could potentially go. But the second reason is I think this isn't just a political issue. To me, this is a faith issue, because if we can't figure out how to live with one another and our differences, then we're not going to be able to figure out how to live in the kingdom that God asks us to live on. Because he is a God that celebrates unity, but he doesn't celebrate sameness necessarily. So our differences aren't a bad thing. We aren't trying to shy away from the way that we're different. We're trying to lean into the things that make us different and to celebrate and to honor them, but to still find the things that draw us together in our commonalities.
And so you actually wrote a book about this. And I love the title of the book. It's called The Space Between Us, but I love the subtitle of this book more. And the subtitle is How Jesus Teaches Us to Live Together When Politics and Religion Pull Us Apart. And this book is part memoir, your story growing up in a politically charged environment. It's a story of your family, but it's mostly a story about how Jesus is teaching us to live together. And so that's exactly what Jesus demonstrated for us.
Yeah, I think we kind of get this idea sometimes reading the Gospels that there were the good guys and the bad guys, and that Jesus was for one type of person and against another type of person. And it's true that, he definitely was for the underdog and the marginalized, but I wouldn't say that he was against the powerful so much. I think he was for all people. I think he was often against the posture that the powerful had towards the underdog. And there's a difference between the two. Because I think when we look at the stories from the Gospels, we see that Jesus was hanging out with the powerful as well, and he was engaging with with them. In Luke, we see that story where he has dinner with the tax collector Zacchaeus. And if you think you know what Jesus was like, you would have assumed that once he engaged Zacchaeus, he would have had some choice words for him. He's at the top of the totem pole. He's taking advantage by overly taxing the people, his own people, working for the Roman government. It would have been a perfect opportunity for Jesus to kind of put him in his place, but instead he invites himself over for dinner. And the thing that I love about that story is we kind of often leave out is that when the crowd sees this happen, it says that they grumble at Jesus, because even then people were seeing that Jesus didn't fit into the boxes that they had for him. And so I think we just need to pay so much attention to the fact that even then Jesus was confusing people. They couldn't quite peg him, and that wasn't a bad thing. It was to show that he was constantly making them uncomfortable in the categories that he refused to fit in.
Yeah, his arms are constantly going this way. How can I bring more people in? And we don't even think about the fact that, I mean, his disciples, Matthew was a tax collector.
Right.
I mean, he was a part of the 1%.
Right, top 1%.
Yeah, I mean, these were powerful people that Jesus was calling to follow him. And he was, I love what you said, he was 100% for the underdog and the marginalized, the last, the least, the lost, the little. But he wasn't demonizing anybody on the other side.
Never to the exclusion of another person.
Yeah, that's right. Jesus would probably be anti-cancel culture.
Yes, I would say so.
Yeah,
Jesus would probably be canceled.
Yeah, that's a good point. He probably would be canceled.
Yeah,
He's deplatformed. He could not show up at churches all over the place. But like, how do you feel about cancel culture in general?
Well, I think it's a problem. I think it's especially a problem when it comes to being followers of Jesus, because when we look at the Gospels, we see that Jesus was never writing the end of someone's story for them, that he was always leaving room for growth. He was always leaving room for change, for redemption, for resurrection. There was always a possibility for something more to happen. And I see the problem with cancel culture is saying there's no hope for you. There's no possibility of you recovering from misspeaking or misdoing. And it's not saying that maybe what was said or done wasn't okay. It's saying that that's the end of your story. That's the final word. And
this
I think
is the totality of who you are.
That's right. And Jesus is saying we are never the totality of what we've done. We are loved and by Jesus, and that God has sent his son to show us how loved and honored we are.
Yeah. Cancel culture it's such a short-sighted view of a human being.
Yeah.
It takes, and I love that we said, it doesn't take into account anybody's story, what their future could be, or who they could be. It found like when Jesus ever engaged with people, and you talk about this so often in your book, he was always asking questions.
Yes. Yeah.
He was not shutting people down. He was engaging in dialogue, which that never happens on social media, right? I mean, it is, you're right. I mean, it is a dumpster fire right now, what's happening on there. And there's no way to engage in that. And I love this story. If you could tell it quickly, I think it's really important because I was around when this happened. But you read a book not long ago, and it was a political book. Mm-hmm. And you were just reading it, loving this book. And then all of a sudden, this author started writing about your family. Mm-hmm. And you did not know it was coming. And this author was writing things that were untrue about your family. Yeah. And so just quickly, like, what did you do in that moment?
Well, first I called you.
Yes, that's right.
Talked me off the ledge.
There was tears, there was anger, there was choice words we shall not repeat on a Wednesday night.
Right. Well, my first instinct was to go into social media, right? To take it to the public and, have a public outcry.
At so-and-so.
That's right.
Who do you think you are?
That's right. But I decided to kind of hunt him down personally and found the publisher and his email, and just after several drafts, emotionally vomited drafts, kind of got to this email basically saying, hey, this is who I am, this is who my family is, this is what you said that wasn't true, and this is how I know it's not true, because I'm living in my family, and this is the experience that I've had. And I went on to say that, even though my family, we don't necessarily land on the same page politically anymore that we used to, but that I still have a deep love and admiration and appreciation for where I came from and how they shaped me, and that we didn't have to land on the same page to appreciate one another and our views. And the thing that probably surprised me the most is he wrote me back. I thought that was going to be the end of the dialogue, but he wrote back and was super gracious about what he had said, admitted that he had gotten his facts wrong. But the thing that I love so much is he said, I would be curious to hear more about your family. And he just started asking questions because he was very liberal politically, very liberal theologically, and he had a grown son who was rebelling from him and moving in a more conservative direction. And he was wondering how
Kids.
my family had navigated this kind of change and a veering away from how I was raised. And I just thought it immediately humanized him for me. We became friends on Facebook. You know, I see pictures of his granddaughter now, and we don't agree on much of anything, I would say, when it comes to what we were posting. But what I loved is that I saw him as a human. He saw me as a human. I see him as a grandfather. I see him as a dad who's trying to reach out to his grown son. And that made all the difference in the world.
Yeah. You began to see him not as a position, but as a person.
That's right.
And that is, you say that in your book, and I will never forget that, as we just when it comes to politics, we see people as positions and not persons. And that's just incredible. So you lived this out, you know, and I was like, gosh, if everybody could just take a second before screaming and pull back, and which is exactly what you did, and go, I just need to ask some questions first. If there's something he's saying, there's something he doesn't understand, there's something I don't understand. So how do we bridge that space between us? It's so good. So you write about a lot of practical steps in your book to help navigate the political wilderness. Let's just focus on a couple?
Yeah.
Like, what's something that we can do going forward? I mean, the conventions are just happening. Conversations are happening. People are thinking right now about their dad. They're thinking about their sister. They're thinking about their neighbor. They're thinking about their college professor. They're thinking about the person they went to college with that is just constantly on social media, and they hate everything that comes out of their mouth. They don't care to see another picture of their dog. They hate everything about them. So what is something we can do?
I would say, practically speaking, one of the things I wrote about in my book was, I think we need to start thinking about this idea of boxing Jesus in. And it's this idea that we've got to start paying attention to how much Jesus resembles us. Like, do we think Jesus backs the same political positions that we do, or backs the same candidates we do, or is a registered Democrat or a registered Republican? Because I think we need to ask the question, if Jesus is starting to look a lot like us, then maybe it's possible that we are conforming him into our image instead of us being conformed into his. So I think we need to take a step back. And if we're not slightly uncomfortable at times with what Jesus is asking us to do or what he represents, then I think we've made him too small. I think we've put him inside these bounds that he doesn't fit in. And I can remember an experience I had where the first time this kind of hit me, of where I thought Jesus in my mind was a white middle-class Republican man. And this kind of shook things up for me.
100%.
I went to a very small Christian conservative college. Everybody there is evangelical Republican, or so I thought. And I was leaving a dorm room on the other side of campus, and I saw hanging up in the hallway a poster for the Young Democrats Club. And I remember thinking, I didn't think we had any Democrats here.
How dare they?
This was crazy.
They've infiltrated the college.
That's right. Let alone have enough for a club.
Right.
And, I thought they'd be one. But what was so surprising was on the poster, it said, Jesus loves Democrats too. And it was funny, and I could admit that was true, but I thought, but he probably likes Republicans more because we stand for all the right things. And I kind of, I didn't go to the meeting, but I just remember it kind of messing with me a little bit. It was like a chink in the armor of, maybe he doesn't fit the way I thought he did. Maybe the box I put him in is too small. And what if he's bigger than that? And what does that mean for me and how I engage the world and my political opinions and my own theology?
That's good. That moment of going, just seeing that poster, it just put a crack in your worldview. But I love that. If you think Jesus agrees with every position you have, there's a good chance you're making him into your own image. We're not being conformed to his. I think that's just a good filter. How does that work practically for you? I mean,
I think it means we've got to be more comfortable engaging with people. I think it gets back to the divisiveness and the separation. If we can begin to engage people on the more human level, I think it's more easy for us to see the image of God in them. But if we only ever see them from a distance, I think it's really easy to write them off as evil or wrong or bad. But when we start to engage on the human level, then we're seeing, wait, I see that they reflect a part of God that I would not know otherwise. And that's a part of Jesus that I don't reflect in my own worldview. So how can I begin to incorporate that into how I think and to how I treat this person?
Yeah, you're taking a posture of leaning in, trying to learn from them, and not necessarily trying to change their mind.
That's right. Yeah.
You're just saying, I need to learn. I need to ask questions. My job here in navigating a political wilderness is not to convince everybody that they're wrong and that my view is correct.
Yes.
You would say that's a dead end.
I would say it's a dead end. I would say if that's your objective, then this book would not be helpful.
Yeah.
I think that, we've got to change our objective going into these relationships with people of, I'm not going to try to convince you that you think wrongly. Not to say that there aren't wrong and harmful ideas out there. There are, but I think we've started to default to the thinking of that if you think differently than me, then it's a bad idea. Different doesn't necessarily mean bad. So we've got to start to understand and appreciate where other people are coming from and understand that chances are there is a very personal story, experience, relationship, something that shaped their individual life that led them to the conclusions and the way that they believe and the way that they vote. Personally.
Morality matters, policy matters,
Yes,
all those things
100%.
matter, but people should matter more.
Right. Yeah.
How did you said something along those lines? Do you remember what you said?
Yeah,
exactly?
well, I think if we're thinking of the same thing, I think it was something along the lines of our positions matter, what we believe matters, we want to be right, righteousness matters.
Yeah.
But if any of those things are causing us to have an unkind posture towards a person, then we can be sure that God is not co-signing on that behavior. And it doesn't matter as much as how we're treating the person in front of us.
Positions matter, people matter more. You had a few other things that I thought were so good. Can you just talk briefly, and before we get to some questions, about how fear is driving the divisiveness in our political discourse right now, and then what we can do to combat that?
Yeah, well, I don't think that's a new thing. I think fear has always kind of been a driver when it comes to our political conversations. You know, every election cycle, you just have to turn on the television and you see a campaign ad with an unflattering picture of one candidate and this ominous voice in the background about what's going to happen if this person wins.
I mean, it's going on.
It's
tonight, last week, I mean.
It's been happening for as long as I can remember. So that's not a new thing. But what I think may be potentially new is that there is a real fear that what people are afraid of is not just possible, but probable in some cases, that there are things that people are afraid of in terms of constitutional rights that might be taken away or things that might be changed, what it might mean for different cultural wars or, you know, whatever it is. Those are very real fears.
If this party gets elected, then this is going to mean this for immigration. If this party gets elected, it's going to mean this for tax reform. If this party gets elected, it's going to mean this for you name it. And those are real fears.
Those are real fears. So it's not to undermine those. But I think that as followers of Jesus, we need to adjust our posture of what are we being motivated out of? Are we being motivated out of that fear? Or are we being motivated out of faith? Because it changes our approach a lot. And again, it's not to be glib about the fears that we have or to make them sound trite. But I think we need to be careful because when we're motivated by fear, that's going to lead to treating the other with suspicion. It's going to lead to bullying. It's going to lead to paranoia. And that's not good for anybody. That's not good for the ones who are fearing and the ones who are being feared. What we need to do is live out of a position of faith. And I talk a little bit about this organization in the book, in this particular chapter. Preemptive Love is an organization that is on the front lines with different people groups who are notoriously against each other and helping them work together. And they're working in places like the Middle East and Iranian families and Israeli doctors that would have every reason in the world to be against each other, who have probable reasons to fear each other. And they're saying one family at a time, we can figure out a way forward in spite of the fear in faith, not because the fear isn't real, but because fear doesn't have to write the end of the story.
And there's fear on all sides.
That's right.
There's, you're talking about the fear of, you know, an Iranian person or an Israeli doctor, but there's fear for the people stepping into that.
Right.
I mean, the preemptive love, and that's all they're doing is stepping into dark, dangerous, difficult places. But they're saying, we're not going to let fear even remove us from the difficult things that are out there. We're going to step into that because that's what we've been called to do as believers. I did love, you mentioned a little bit, but I love this thing that you wrote in your book. I'm just going to read it real quickly. You said, fear breeds suspicion, fear breeds paranoia, fear breeds cowardice, fear breeds bullying, and fear breeds a type of human we don't want to be and we don't want to know, and we are better than that.
Well, just to add to that, I think that also, this is a big deal for our kids watching. I think another kind of motivation for wanting to do this book was that our kids are starting to get to the age where they were observing what's happening on the news. They're observing conversations, and they are paying attention to what fear looks like when it's played out in our lives. And I think it not only hurts us to be fearing the other, we are hurting the generation behind us when we are teaching them. We're passing down these behaviors. We're passing down these motivations. And if they see us fearing people and fearing outcomes, then they aren't going to be any better off. And I think we have the responsibility as a generation raising up the next generation to let it stop with us.
Fear doesn't write the end of the story, right?
Yeah.
We may have any questions here in just 1 second, but before we get to those, just any final thoughts? I mean, there's people out there that have specific people probably they are thinking about. What do you say to them, just kind of wrapping up?
Well, Lamott has this quote. She says, if you want to change the way you feel about people, you need to change the way you treat them. And I love that idea of just behaving our way into a new way of belief about other people. I don't think we're going to change the way we think from the sidelines. I think we're going to change the way we think by engaging one-on-one in relationships. And I think it's time for us to stop relying on our leaders and elected officials to lead out in this. I think it's going to happen one-on-one in our families. It's going to happen in our neighborhoods and with our coworkers and our friends. We've got to be willing to take the first step out there with no guarantee of what's going to be given back to us, but to say that this is what love looks like played out in my faith.
We can't wait for this to be a top-down deal. We really can make a difference in this.
Yeah.
So thanks for sharing that. And there's so many more practical things in the book that we just can't get into in 20 or 25 minutes. A couple of questions came in. All right, that we're going to try to knock through really quickly. All right, one question. What is a fun story from campaigning with your family?
Oh, that's a good question. I'll tell the story. I was in college at the time when it happened, but there was like a traditional pancake flipping contest in the primary season in New Hampshire. And I guess all the Republican candidates typically do this pancake flipping contest. And apparently, I was not there, but my dad fell off the stage as he was flipping the pancake, and then it was impersonated on SNL. So I don't know if you could say that was either funny / humiliating to be a college freshman watching your dad made fun of on SNL. I don't know. It could go either way. Depends on the day.
It wasn't fun at the time, but
no,
now
but it's a great story.
Now it's a great story. It's super fun. Okay, just a couple more quick ones. This is good. How do you suggest we approach and engage people who hear our position first, but then immediately want to cancel us?
I think that we've got to lead with question asking. So if they want to cancel us, then we've got to be asking questions back to them of, what's the emotional reaction that you're having towards hearing my position, or what makes you so angry about me? I think we need to stop making the assumption that people want to cancel us. Sometimes they'll flat out tell us they do.
Yeah.
But I think we need to stop making the assumption that there's no hope for this relationship because I know what they would say. And instead lean in and be like, help me understand why you have so much energy around this, because I see that it really matters to you and I care about you as a person. So tell me, how can I help you kind of process that aloud and help you see me, not just as a position, but as a person, and kind of lead that way.
Yeah. And this is not a universal fix.
No.
But it's a posture that we have to have of question asking.
That somebody needs to take the first step.
Somebody's got to take the first step. This was a question from Russ. He said, you briefly mentioned navigating through political and faith differences within families. Mm-hmm. We tend to avoid these topics when we know there are differences to avoid uncomfortable conversations. Mm-hmm. So is this the best approach, or is there a more effective opportunity?
I would say to not avoid them. And I think you've got to be careful in how you approach them. But there's a difference. I talk a little bit about this. There's a difference between keeping peace and making peace. And I think for a long time, Christians especially have been taught that you don't talk about politics or faith differences in polite company. It's not good dinner conversation. But I think it's made us very passive in how we talk about important things. And I also think it's allowed that muscle of engagement and constructive criticism and constructive dialogue to atrophy. So I think our lack of talking about it has actually hurt us in the long run. So I think we've got to be willing to wade very carefully into the waters. And again, it helps when you've got people who are willing on both sides and are not seeing this as a debate, but just as an opportunity to learn more about one another and that chance.
Yeah. And in some ways, it sounds Pollyanna in some ways, but this is, you don't say that lightly. I mean, this is hard work, and sometimes there's years of dysfunction that you're trying to undo and stepping into relationships and those kinds of things.
And so we hang out with my family. There are heated conversations where we don't land on the same page. And I think that that's okay to know, that it's okay that we all can end up heated and we can all end up fighting for our position. It's not bad to express what we're thinking, but I think we just need to be able to say that at the end of the day, are we going to allow that political decision that they're making to be the thing that cuts us off relationally from them? Because that's a big leap. And I think a lot of people are willing to make that leap now. And I'm saying, I'm not sure that it's worth it.
Yeah. And you alone know if there's somebody that just cannot be engaged,
Yeah.
you can continue to love them, continue to ask them questions, and you can have the posture of like, this person matters more. So how do I show this person as much love as possible? And that may mean avoiding at times.
At times, yeah.
But yeah, I like that difference. We're not supposed to keep the peace as Christians. Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers,
Right.
for they will be called
Children of God.
children of God. And I think that's what we're called to
Yeah.
be in this space. We are children of God. If we're Christians, we're Christ followers, this is what we're called to do. How do we do that? So thanks for your questions, Sarah. Thanks for coming and sharing your stories and your heart. And before we close, I've got a couple quick things to share with everybody. Would you just like pray for us? Pray for the people watching. Pray for the people that are going to watch this later. Pray for families. Pray for our divided nation. And I mean, this is not just our country.
Yeah.
Right. This is all over the world. So just do a brief prayer for us, if you don't mind.
God, we just, we thank you that you are over all and that you are in all and that you are with us and for us. And God, is deeply divided as we feel now and as unique as our time feels now, we know that it is not a surprise to you, that it's not new to you. And so God, we just pray that in the months and weeks ahead, especially as things feel more conflictive and more divisive than ever, we just pray, God, that your presence is felt and known and experienced in ways that we maybe would not be able to anticipate. Help us to see you in the image of you in the people across the table from us, across the aisle from us, and whatever difference that looks like. Help us to see you reflected back to us and to honor the image of you and the people unlike us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thanks. I'm so glad I get to live with you. Hey, real quick, if you are interested in learning more, I mean, her book is fantastic. It comes out September 8th, but it is available right now on pre-order. So you can head to Amazon, Sarah Anderson, The Space Between Us, and Barnes & Noble, and anywhere you want to buy your book, it's probably there. Guys, join us. We'd love for you to join us this upcoming Sunday as we have part 3 of Welcome the Wilderness, and we'll also be back here next Wednesday night talking about navigating the wilderness in leadership with Bo. So we'll see you Sunday, and we'll see you next Wednesday. Thanks for joining us.